tech companies here in the US with software agencies in countries like Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, mainly South and Central America that have available talent. The idea is that they will assign these engineers to your project full-time under a monthly basis model, so you can develop your product in a very flexible way. So we're going to share more information on the chat. If you have questions about it, we'll be more than glad to answer it. So today, as we mentioned earlier, we will have this presentation with John Bentley. I will introduce him in a moment. The idea is that we will learn a lot about product growth and how to scale these companies, the software as a service startups as well. And the idea is that you can ask all the questions that you have during the whole presentation using the Q&A section at the bottom and also the chat. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to our special guest today, John Bentley. He's an entrepreneur, CTO, advisor, and coach with a focus on software as a service and software-enabled startups. John helped founders transform ideas into growing scalable software as a service platforms and teams. So hi, John. How are you?
Good, Omar. Thanks for having me on and let me do this.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So we would like to see you can share and give us a quick intro about yourself, your background, and then tell us about your hiring philosophy. How do you feel about hiring people when you're building a company? And start with the presentation.
Sounds good. Yeah, my name is John Bentley. I am a co-founder of startups, and I say I'm a co-founder because I tend to be a CTO and the technical person. And usually what I do is find people with great ideas and help them turn them into products. And I enjoy that part of it. And I enjoy having someone else figure out the fundraising and some of those other things. I also work with a lot of other startups in an advisory and coaching capacity. And my whole life is now centered around startups and product build. And that's what I spend most of my time doing. From a hiring standpoint, one of the reasons I was excited to be working with Symbiosis on this presentation and looking forward to partnership and staffing teams is that with a startup, you really need a mix of resources. Startups that just try to bring some people in from the local area tend to have a hard time finding talent or also spending too much money on that. We're seeing a lot of people on the West Coast look in other parts of the United States as well as the world for more cost-effective labor, but also just finding the right talent. So you're really looking for people that'll fit in. And the other extreme I've seen is startups that just outsource everything to a single service provider. Mm-hmm. In those cases, you don't really own your product anymore because you don't own the people, because you don't really directly manage the people that are building it. So you really want to find a hybrid where you have some people that are internal. I like a contract to hire model, where you can work with somebody to determine before that they're going to be a good fit. And it's tough with an interview to do that. Contract to hire, you can do a few months, let someone be productive. They also get to decide if it's a good fit for them long term, so it works better for everyone all around. And then contracting for surge for more pieces where you need people integrated with the team, and then balancing that with service providers. So when you're doing big builds or big things that you have well defined, you can outsource those things and then make sure you have the team that can transition it back to keep maintaining. So, Omar, with that, shall I begin?
Yeah, please.
All right.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So we're talking today about building for product growth. Products are much like everything else. They develop over time. So there's a lot of growing, and products really, they grow in what they do, but also in how many people they support, what they provide, and those kind of things. So a lot of times I'll talk about growth, and growth is really the revenue and the ability for us to fund our products and companies. And then we get into scale, and scale is how we enable the growth and make sure that we have the people, processes, and everything in place to make that successful. Today, we're going to be looking at a few things that are closely related. First, we're going to be looking just in general about the product build process and in context of the startup journey and how that works. If you're a first-time founder, we are going to start from the beginning, so it should give you a lot of good information of how to even begin. With that, we're also going to take a focus on quality and look at asking some different aspects of quality beyond just software testing. And then along the way, we'll be talking about product roadmaps, because a product roadmap is definitely a key document throughout the startup journey. It's one of the things that is used for guiding product teams, raising funding, and so it's all over the place. It's very important. Again, just a little bit about me, a few more just quick details. When we say I'm a lifelong coder, I didn't start at birth, but I did start at 10 years old. So I've been writing code for like 40 years, and it's been about 30 professionally. So it's been a long time, and I really enjoy it. I look at my philosophy as I'm people driven, but product focused. And so what's interesting is that startups and products are really a lot all about the team and who you assemble. But everybody starts trying to hire first, and you really need to get some things ready before you hire them. So that's where your product focus and setting the right context to make those people successful. I am a serial startup founder and entrepreneur. I've started 5 or 6 companies. I've lost actually count of the ones I actually started with. I've worked with, a dozen or so more, and I'm currently have 3 startups that are active. 2 have fundraised that are in market, and a third one's in market and is building some traction for fundraising. And then, as I said before, I coach, mentor, and advise startups. I do that in our local startup community. I also do that. I've done it with people across the United States and in different countries, doing one-on-one consults, those kind of things. So this is what I spend my time doing as startups. So let's get into it. Let's go start with the startup journey. I put this picture together earlier this year as I was trying to better explain to people what is a startup and how does it evolve. And really, it starts off along the top with two key phases to get through to then to get to being a growing business. The first one's idea to market. So generally, an entrepreneur starts with an idea, but that idea needs to meet the marketplace. And just like no plan survives contact with the enemy, no idea really is perfect for the market, but they are very good for the market. And so you work with the market to figure that out. So that's how you develop your idea to bring it to market and really get validation from people and see how it will go. And then from there, you scale for growth. So as your idea develops in a market and you actually prove out the idea, you then have to start scaling, and you start scaling the product and the technology. But moreover, you need to scale the business across all functions, as well as scaling the organization. So there's a lot of maturity that goes on in that phase, with the goal of becoming a growing business. Within those, we start off, before even talking about a product, we start off with idea validation. And this is where you do the most important thing: talk to customers. Now, these won't be existing customers because the idea is new, but these will be people that are your best candidate customers, your ideal customers, and maybe not so ideal. And in this process, you usually cast a wider net and start to really track into who really fits with your idea and learning their language and things like that. From there, you develop that idea into a product, and then you go into product validation. And this is where you start doing the MVP. Let me step back for a second, because MVPs, the minimum viable product, is very key, and we try to rush towards them. So something we can do in the idea validation, I call a micro viable offering, which is where you provide just enough to let someone experience your benefit without building a whole lot of system. So once we get through those processes, then we can start on the MVP, and that's where we really start building as one really well-established entrepreneur said, that you're going to release something. If you're not embarrassed by it, you waited too long. Yeah. So you're going to you're going to put out a product, and the product is going to have very little features. I've got a system right now where you can now change your password, but the first time I released it, you couldn't, and you still can't do user administration. We've only got a few customers on it, and user administration tools take a while to build, and they don't add value. So minimum viable product is really minimum. Trying to get them in those early phases to that value proposition, experience that benefit. And then you go through that to get your product built out. And then you switch over to product traction. And this is really where you've got a good core set of features you have self sign up and these kind of things. And now you start really trying to go get those additional people on it to prove out the product, both to get revenue and also to look for additional investment. And when you get to that level where you've got a really good market presence, now you're going to product scale. And that's really where you're looking at everything that's not been automated starts becoming automated. Your processes, your teams, internal tools, all those kind of things start to really get built out. And that really gets you into towards that growing business.
John, I would like
Yeah.
to ask you a few questions. What happened for non-technical founders at this stage? If they are not able to build an MVP, what tools do you recommend them to use?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. And I'll start with that the thing that a non-technical founder is critical in doing this process is defining the product and defining the features. So there's a lot of things that in a discipline called product management that is where I say product marketing meets product delivery. So that's where a non-technical founder is crucial in helping defining what that experience is going to be. There are, basically you start looking early MVP. You really start looking at whatever the least expensive tools are. If you are comfortable doing it, you can use things like web building tools with forms and some limited automation. There are some no-code tools. If you have a technical code founder, they can help build out some of those more minimal lift things. But you're really looking at what is the least amount of effort it takes to demonstrate the most value in filling that in. The one thing I'll caution about no-code tools and those kind of platforms is that they're called no-code, but they're not no programming. Coding is taking a series of steps and putting them into a language that a computer can eventually understand. But programming is figuring out the set of steps, the sequence, the information. And while a no-code platform, you're not writing code, you actually really are. You're just using the user interface and those tools to create that sequence of events. So even if you're doing like a click funnel in marketing and you have 4 or 5 steps in your form that's taking people through and you're gathering data and making decisions on where to send them, you're actually developing a small program. And some of the things for non-technical founders is that early on, it maybe you can actually use that to demonstrate the idea to even attract some team members and things that'll be willing to throw in with you on equity. So you're saving some money, but you want to watch out because you'll end up spending all your time trying to build the system in the MVP and not have the time to do the fundraising and sales and marketing and customer interaction. So there's a real trade-off there, which is why we see teams with startups. Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue into, when we look at the startup against the product, especially in this idea phase. The idea phase really has, this is where, if you're a non-technical founder, you may want to especially try out, I actually know somebody that's got a startup that's used Wix as the front end to develop the concept. Okay. Now, to add any customers takes a bit of work. But as far as a very minimal implementation, it's done its job and it's attracted a lot of team members and it's done well. When you go through idea validation, your idea starts to become a product. And I'll say that I consider the idea to be the 3 or 4 key features that deliver the benefit. The product starts building out those features to turn it into a little bit wider, so you can start delivering it as software, and that's where it continues to grow. A product to platform really goes to how extensive the software product gets to be. When we think of a product, we think of those things having a lot of standard features with some ability to configure and add your own data elements and things like that. But when you get to platforms, things like Salesforce, which is one of the first software as a service systems, it has its own language and data store and ways of adding extensions and things like that. So when you think about WordPress is a platform. You can add themes, you can write plugins, it has APIs, it has add-on tools, it has integrations. So that platform really gets you to that really big level that lets you add those values. But nothing starts as a platform. People that go out to build a platform, you have to have a platform in mind maybe, but if you try to build a platform, you'll build a lot of stuff no one wants. Just like if you try to build too much product at first, you try to once. So going through this journey is really important, and having a progression from idea in the platform over time with actual people using it and giving feedback. My rule is that just because your mom says it's a great product doesn't mean it's a great product. Doesn't mean it's a bad product, because mom's pretty smart, but you got to get past mom to some customers. Now, going from the journey, let's dive more specific. Now we kind of oriented around where startups are at. Let's take a look at what it takes to build a product. And so I've got a simple left to right progression. So first of all, anybody that's first time, you're not going to do all this right at first. And this looks really organized and everything. This is the product build cycle from doing an MVP to doing a mature product. It all's the same steps, but how much you do in each step and how much you put at risk and those kind of things changes. So this will run anywhere from a 1 month to a 1 week to a 6 month cycle. You could actually do this as a design sprint. So, the amount of work it takes is really where you're at in the process. So you start off with your inputs. Probably the most important thing is market research. Now, I say market research because you need to look at more than talking to 5 people, so you're not too stilted. But if you don't talk to anybody, if you just go to forums, run surveys, and you don't actually sit down with real customers and get some engagement, the chances of success are a lot less. So I'll say market research, early on especially, maybe talking with a handful of customers and then building from that, as well as just reading articles and trends and reading about competitors. That's where you get into competitive analysis. Here's a little tip, pro tip. If you go to the annual report for any publicly traded company that's anywhere near your segment, and you want to wonder what they're worried about, they actually have to put in that document, not the fancy PDF with all the graphics that they put out for investors. You go to the Edgar filing, and in there you will find everything they're worried about from competitors, because they have to disclose it. So it's really good information. So competitive analysis really helps you understand the market more. And then I say customer feedback. That's when you start getting started. Customer feedback, also think of customer interviews, the proactive feedback before you do something. You'll do this early on, but also if you're thinking about adding new features and things like that later down, you want to start having a customer council or things like that to help you out. All of these start to get translated. And this is where, this is mainly work by non-technical founders. I mean, it could be technical if you're doing both sides, but this is not the technical focus. This is defining the market and the product and what you're really going to do and fleshing out the idea. You're going to turn that into a feature backlog. And these features are really listing out what are the things the system needs to do, and maybe some sketches of an idea of how the UI will interact. What are the key pieces of information you're going to gather? So the high level of what it is, there's different kinds of features that you get into that you can catalog, because you'll start off with features that are core to the benefit, features that kind of enable that benefit, and then some features you just need, you'll actually get from some of your technical folks, like subscription management and billing and logging, things the customer will need, but really need because they're using software, not because they're using your software. So those are some general things. The feature backlog starts to really flesh out. Then you map that with the system architecture. System architecture is a high level kind of technical design. It's more conceptual at first, and then you stay a conceptual layer. Initially, this is pretty simple, of just following good software practices and maybe a few little unique things depending on what you're building. You put these two things together, and then you get the product roadmap. And I really define a product roadmap. There's a lot of documentation. I've seen people come to me with things they found defined, and it looks like a half of a entrepreneur class at a Stanford University or something. But the product roadmap is your product over time. It's the features and the architecture as it evolves, and as you're going to deliver it out a step at a time. Now, early on, a product roadmap will be really simple, of just the next few features plan to roll out in a very simple delivery. This will mature over time as well. Once you have this feature backlog, system architecture, and product roadmap, you have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. And again, based on the level where you're at, you'll have enough of an idea to actually execute on. That'll also help you build your team, where you can actually find the right people. So because you now talk to them about what you're going to build, and how they fit into it. And now you can actually gauge some interest as well as organize them to help you build it. And then the build team actually creates the product releases, and that's the different rollouts that come in the different feature sets. Now, just to step back for a second, I'm not going to go a lot into this, but so if you're earlier in your stage, and that was a lot, there's really a little bit less you start with, but it's the same kind of thing as, rather than a whole lot of market research, you're probably starting more with your idea and concept, which will be informed by some market research. You do some competitor research, you'll have talked to some customer interviews, but really with the idea development, you're trying to get just enough information from the customers to validate, so you can basically come up with a benefit hypothesis. I believe that if I can do this in this way, do something in this way, it adds value, and it added value in doing it. And then you come up with a test plan for the idea. This is more the execution. You put those together and you go through an idea validation cycle where you actually try it out with the users. Early stages, you'll actually sit down with them. You might go over a Zoom call like this and show it in the video. You might have something small for them to try and get feedback with the survey. Once you have that information, you can figure out your team, and you do a small product release to go validate the idea. So this is early on and gives you that kind of stage. Idea, you start a lot lighter, like I was saying, but as you can see, it really parallels the product build cycle. So it's not that much different other than how much you're investing in the unknown. So from there, the question gets to be, okay, I've showed you a lot of charts and diagrams that, I try to use some fancy graphics, but where do you really start? And so what I found is that these questions that I learned in like junior high, we did have computers, but we did not have smartphones. So it was a while ago. I learned these 6 questions. And if I look them up, they call them the 5 W's and the 1 H. They also call them the journalistic inquiry questions. But who, what, where, when, why, and how satisfy some basic things that it seems like we as humans seem to approach an idea. So like when you're like reading a news story, you kind of try to read who it's about, is it relevant to you, and those kind of things to get people's attention. Who is really important. What happened is really important. Where did it happen? When I read something about an insect that's a pest, where it happens is really important, because if it's not near my house, I'm not so much worried about my plants or my trees or my yard or anything. But if it's like in an area where I get food from, I probably have more concern. So where gets to be important. When did this happen recently? There's nothing worse on the internet than you see this new hot story. You found out it happened 5 years ago. If you see a story about a guy going through a Taco Bell drive-thru to make his own taco, that did happen. It's on the internet all the time. It happened at the Taco Bell closest to me. It happened 5 years ago. It's not new. Just to warn you. Why did they do it? That's always an area of speculation, and how they went about it. I have teenagers, so I really don't like it when they read how people got away with things. Gives them a little too smart. But using these basic questions and approaching things that way really starts to lay out a process I apply this to a lot of processes, because they're the fundamental things that you generally need to know. So with the product build, you see these boxes, the new concepts, but really what we're starting out with, why? With your product, your idea, the first question to ask is, why would someone use it? Why would they pay money for it? Why would they even come to it? And that's really with the market research, the competitive analysis, the customer feedback, you're really trying to figure out that benefit, the why of your product. And sometimes, at a larger scale, there's a great book called Start With Why. The bigger why is what keeps you motivated as well. But you start with why. And because why is really important. Even Kobe talks about first thing first and stuff like that. All that is about prioritization, the why. So after why, the next real question is what. So if I have a reason to come use your product to get a benefit, I've answered my why. Now I'm going to ask, well, what does it do to deliver that benefit? And so that's the features. Those are the things I'm going to build out. Now, I said before, the features will start predominantly with the benefit features, and then you'll get into the enabling features. You'll have some features that the what is just to make the software run, or to make billing work, like invoices and things like that. So there's a lot of general stuff that gets photoed there, but the big whats are focused on the bigger whys. So after so you know why and what. So the next question gets to be how. So you've got a product. Let's say that I'm trying to think of something will get me in trouble. Well, actually, I use one that I'm working on. We're working on a better way to deliver assessments. So the big why is it's hard to actually gather good information from people, and it takes a lot of time to do it with people. So automating that and getting good quality data to help make decisions and things like that are common processes that are done by people, classic automation. So the what is an ability to find questions that go around an assessment and answers and things like that. So then we get into how. Well, the how gets to be, right now we're using, it's a form that you go in and answer questions. It has scoring and has the ability to go past and things like that. And we're using a web-based technology. We've organized it into layers, so the user interface, the services, the database are separate, and things like that. Then you get to the where. So I know the benefit, I know the features, I know what I'm doing it, I know how I'm doing it. Where is it going to run? And that's interesting because in our case, our assessments, we're running it as mobile web. We have a need for wider displays and consuming data from the actual assessments. So we want that where for that, and then we've made it mobile web. Later, the where will include apps to give it an app option for that experience. But we also use mobile web because we can trigger off of SMS. That if you're dealing with people that you're not going to be doing all the time, you don't have the barrier of downloading an app. There's a lot of different wheres that are out there. There are some things like Stripe that started with API. Something like Shopify, and these are both in the e-commerce space, started more with UI. Shopify has API. Stripe now has a UI you can do billing from. So there's balances like that go on for the where that develops over time. So now I kind of got my basics of, I know why I would use it. I know what I'm using. I know kind of how it's going to be built. I know how it's built and delivered. I know where I can use it from my phone, from the web, those kind of things, IoT, all kinds of wares out there. Now I can turn that into a product map, and that's collecting my what, how, and where, and my what ties back to my why. So I've kind of got that implicitly. But now I'm going to talk about over time where it's going to be. Now, early on, you're going to be focused really on the product you're going to deliver, getting that MVP out. A little bit later, you are going to you're going to see a little bit more, like when you go into later fundraising phases and things. You're going to say, okay, it might be that, future state with no commitment, we're going to have an app. And then later it's like, well, if you invest, part of the thing we're going to invest to spend is the app, or we're going to have an IoT device, and now we're going to be able to do it from a phone. There's all kinds of things with the where. So that over time, the when gets really important to deliver that out there. It also kind of helps you, again, with recruiting. And then we get to the building the team, we start really getting to who. And that's what I was talking earlier about, team and how you hire them versus service providers. You should always have a mix. I was talking to a group the other day that does things around Google Cloud, and I'm working with a startup where having someone else do Google Cloud would make a lot of sense and give them some framework for scaling rather than trying to hire people to do it themselves, because how it's delivered is pretty standard. What they're building feature-wise is more important, so you find that trade-off. But the other thing with the who is that, it's much easier to find the right who when you know what and how you're going to build something. But the other thing is that as you're hiring those people, you define enough to get at the ballpark, but you want to have some flexibility so that when they're coming on, they know that things will adjust and alter. And all these things are changing. Nothing's ever fixed. There's a balance you have to find there. And then finally, that gets us to the product release. So we get all of our 6 questions in here, and we get the why, the what, the how, the where, the when, and the who. And now we're really getting that product moving forward. And we got all the basics in. So if you don't remember anything else, the product build cycle, if you remember that covering who, what, where, when, and how will get you a lot of the direction or get you a lot of the distance, and organizing those in the right steps will yield better results. And some people will differ. So but if someone's coming in and say they could do something and they can't help you answer all these questions, they're probably not really a service provider that can build the whole thing. So
John,
yeah, go ahead.
just a quick question. Yeah. So regarding the building the team part, I remember that some of our early advisors told us like the first hiring are very, very important, right? So they have to be like rock stars on the paper, because those are the guys that will build your product, and those are the guys that will adapt and adjust as fast as you need while you're building this first product. So where do you recommend to find these people? I mean, like, are there any special place to find these early employees, or also to provide them with equity? Could be like a good option to keep them on board.
I mean, equity, definitely. What you're looking at, so I mean, this is probably the question I get asked most often is, and I get asked a lot being at a CTO level, how do you find a CTO? How do you find a technical lead? So what you want to do is, you will encounter good people. A lot of times it's really, it's a lot of networking. It's a lot of being in places where these folks will show up. So like, I was on a technical founder circle this week that was just a round table. So any of these type of events you can go to in a local area, there's a lot of times startup things. There's more of these online now to just get and meet people, interacting in different communities that are there. You can find some, LinkedIn, you can find some, but there's like, there's some ways to get involved with, try to remember the Y Combinator, Techstars, some of these bigger ones on the technology side to get started. A lot of what you need to do is that when you first start working with some people, it's important, if you don't know them really well, not to overcommit. So you don't need a CTO, your first person, to be the CTO. You need them to be able to do whatever you need them to do. Now you want to evaluate them, so you don't want to give away the CTO title to the first person you meet. You got to think about it almost like dating. It's like, you got to have coffee, and coffee is kind of like a per engagement. Like, you're going to do this for this value, and then like, you move up to dinner, and so now and now you're kind of more steady, and then maybe giving them a title is getting married. I mean, hiring them is more like living together. So there's levels of commitment to that. So you got to be, so you want to watch that. But you're right on. The other thing is that's interesting is that whenever you're hiring startup people, you have to hire people that have a product mentality and have this kind of crawl, walk, run ability to see things and be okay with leaving some things undone. Where I see, it's funny is that, it's describing who you need to find. It's almost always easy to describe what you want to watch out for. So you want to watch out for people who are only interested in title and equity. You want people that want to solve the problem. I had a friend who had a startup that was around rely on machine learning, and he was technical. He built software, but machine learning wasn't really his thing. He found the first person he talked to wanted to be CTO and wanted to get a big equity stake. But all they talked about was how much they didn't want to work, and that's kind of scary when you're in a startup. Next person he met, it took him 2 weeks after they he realized it was the right person. It took 2 weeks to get the guy to focus long enough to even talk about an equity deal because he was so excited about the problem. That's the kind of problem you want to have with the co-founders. They want to solve the problem. The other thing is that early on, if you're building something and the UI is really important for that first MVP, there's a lot of great UI people. They usually aren't all that good at the back end. And a lot of times, if they do UX really well, they haven't spent time learning computer architecture or cloud or things like that. So they'll be a great person. They could become a key product officer. There's all kinds of things that could go. They're probably not a CTO though. So you really got to gauge your interest, and you want to have that conversation early about what the longer term plans are. As you fill in, you need to start looking at more. After you like 3 or 4 people and they're full stack and they're going all over the place, people want to keep finding that. You really, as you scale, need to start to stratify people into roles that really make sense and dividing the team up into those areas of expertise. But when you're hiring those people, you really want to find people that are high in collaboration. Okay. So a lot of technical depth doesn't do well. The other thing is, I love bringing on newer folks, and I love bringing in people that actually have had trouble being hired, not because they can't do the work, but because they don't interview well. but those communication skills and things in a startup, you don't have time to overcome some of those. But you want to make sure those people are in, but you want to set the expectation you're hiring that longer term, the way you grow and add value in that company is not by just what you produce, but how you make other people better. And that includes people that are an individual contributor, that are leadership positions versus management positions. They all need to know how to work together and make others better. And I think that's key in building the team.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think building from there, so, we got the idea of the product and the release. The next thing is really, how do you measure quality? And I think I really thought about this because there's a lot of standard answers around testing, which is around defects, and that's an easy measure. But I really started thinking about the complete product and how do you evaluate a product? And when you think about writing a Yelp review, or a Google review or an Amazon or something, what are the things that make you compel you to write a good review? And what are the things you're liable to gripe about? And those are good ways to start thinking about quality. Probably the most fundamental way to define quality is defects. And defects are actual bugs where something does not perform the way as it's designed to. Now, some of those defects are actually experienced bugs because they don't work the way someone would expect them to. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we're going to start just with raw defects. And it is the most essential, and it is the most quantifiable, because essentially, but this is the trick, you have to have the test to measure the defect against. So defects are a measure against how it's documented to work and how you can test and validate it, and you can measure defects rate. So if you've engaged someone to write code for you, you need to give them what their exit criteria is, what it has to test, and how it needs to work ahead of time, so they know how to be successful, and so you can make sure they were successful. I talked to a lot of people that work with a provider, and they complained that they didn't build what they wanted. But they also say, we didn't have time to specify it. So if you don't have time, a lot of times it's hard to spend all that time. You got to either budget for rework, but at least set some base expectations. You don't have to be an expert. Later on, you want to hire an expert in testing. But the fundamental question is, what is it supposed to do? And does it do it well? Does it do it that way? Now, kind of the next level is error handling, which in MVP you may have a little bit of, but early on, it's kind of like if you hit all the right buttons, it will do it, and hopefully it grays out so you can't do something blatantly wrong. But if but if you do something weird, it may not handle it well. So that's kind of the next level of quality, is how does it handle when things go wrong? Initially, you didn't have some error messaging, but and a lot of logging. Later, you kind of get this better error handling. And then, but the real thing that you're really building for, and you'll want to look in and talk to developers about, your technical folks, is we call regression testing. And this is the question of, and this is harder, like you got a system and it does 15 things now. So you go add number 16, or you change number 12. The question is 12 working or is 16 working? The question is, what happened to 1 to 11? What happened to 13 through 15? Did these things break as well? And that's regression testing. And, early regression testing can be manual, which takes longer and longer as you go on because you have to test everything. Automated testing makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of talk about how much. I'm not a test-driven person. I do think you need integration tests, so I'm test-driven to that. The extreme is you test everything with the test cases. You have more test cases than code. If what you're building people's lives depends on, then you should probably follow that approach. And especially the part where it's keeping my heart beating or something. I greatly appreciate you following that approach. But beyond that, you kind of have some level where integration's okay because you are testing all the functions, but you may take a little more work to find out where it broke. And this is where there's this thing called continuous integration, continuous deployment. I think I got that right, or I get it right. But CI/CD. I never can remember what they stand once we get the initials. But anyways, this integration deployment cycle, you want to keep being able to do. Automated testing and this defect testing is really key to that as well. And that's testing at the code level for defects. Now, beyond that, I alluded to is the experience. And this is a little more subjective, but it's also very important. And the question gets to be not did it do what it was supposed to do, but did it do what I expected it to do? And this is as much could be a UX question and how you define the product as how it was built. So the question gets to be, if I hit this button, where you start with this is does it work like everything else would do? Is it intuitive? Is it consistent with how other pieces of software work? 80-20 rule, 80% of what you do in the system, you should have some experience, you should have some measure of standard, de facto standard for that. And then, beyond that, it starts to become a question of, what a customer's expecting that market and stuff like that. But then for the growth level, when you start getting to mature product to platform, the real question is, what other ways should we do this? So going back to an MVP, I'll have usually one place I can do one function. And then I start asking, well, what are some other other places I'm able to execute that? And then what are some really more advanced ways where I can get to those features from more places? So you'll see this in like Microsoft Windows. There's a lot of places or ways you can do something like 5 or 6 different ways. They've been added over time, but you'll find them using based upon what you're thinking about, what you're doing at that point in time. So that really starts to get your experience up. And some of the things you could do with that is, start getting some UX people involved that are professionals. You can use user testing, customer feedback. Kind of the ultimate level is getting tracking interaction within apps to gain insights, so you actually know what's going on. The next level of quality, so defects and experience you'll hit early on. And some of the experience I talked about was completeness. And completeness is what do I need to do to make this a more robust feature? This overlaps heavily with experience. But I go back to, what I was talking about before with MVP and early features is, you really start to say, okay, what other things would I need to do in this feature to give a full experience? Like I have a list of people. Do I have a search? Do I have a filter? Do I have a sort? Can I group it and tag it in different ways? These things start to make that more robust and take more work in integration. I talked before about variations to fill the same thing. And then also the pro level starts to be customization. So you actually can configure what it's doing and define what it's doing. Think about the homepage, you're going to a website. The dashboard, you have a lot of things put on there for you. The ultimate level is I can pick what I see and I can filter them and save it and have it remember how I positioned them. So that's kind of the level of growth. And so as you go to MVP to product, you really start going from, missing features for self-management to greater self-management by the user. As you mature the product, you start having there's more ways to do it. And really, as you go to product to platform, you start having a lot more customization and extensibility. And then finally, there's accessibility. In this way, I do think we should make products accessible to more people with a variety of different needs, screen readers for people that may have sight impairment, things that are visual, don't require sounds, people with visual impairment and so forth. But also I'm talking about the modality of how do you actually get to things. So this is more of the where kind of question. This is where if I start off with a web app, do I start to provide it in a, initially, like I'll start off with, I have an IoT device. So everything's the IoT, and maybe I have an app to set it up. Well, later it's like, well, could I set it up, manage it via the web? Could I add that feature into an app and things like that? That next level, you start having those different ways. I have a web, now I have an app, and I have a different way of getting to it. Maybe I have a phone app, and I also have maybe like a television kind of streaming app and things like that. Then you start creating those kind of ways. And these kind of ways grow, and ultimately like APIs, which for system-to-system interface integrations, but even Zapier integrations and things like that. What are those ways you can give more ways to get to your features that your customers need so you can grow how they're using it and the value of your application? And these are some actually great ways to add on new ways to make money off of standard plans and more premium or different modalities of service. And that gives you kind of a measure of quality. And then to wrap up, product roadmap, we talked about this a bit with product build, but a few things I wanted to highlight is just a quick focus of, again, we're talking about features, and we're really talking about, what those are, and the system architecture. So what and how and where we're going to deliver something over time. And that time is the release plan. You kind of merge this into when you're planning, and some of this you'll let customers know. There's a point at which you do that, or investors know. There's a point at which it'll be internal planning because you're not willing to commit, but you're trying to think through it. A lot of times for us developers, we're people building product, we're actually thinking about something we have to do maybe 3 years from now as a potential, so we don't paint ourselves into a corner and make something where we have to go rewrite something. We made it flexible enough. Or, excuse me, or we also are knowing where that's going to happen. And then, so check real quick here. Hold on, check out my notes. But as you group these features, so the other thing is over time is you get the features, but you also get the technical changes. So this is also how you're evolving your product for scale later. So like early on, you usually use a few machines and it's a lot of fixed load. Horizontal scaling and containers and platform as a service. All this stuff sells great, but I know lots of startups that use it early on, and it's like at very first it saved a lot of money, and then it started to put them out of business. So there's really some break points. You want to be really careful with that. So the technical changes also end up with milestones. And one of the ways I think about this is a roadmap is for a road trip. So you think of each location as a release of the product. At that location, if you think about traveling through an actual road trip, when you stop someplace, you may have a list of things you want to do. That's the kind of the itinerary for each of those locations. And the roads in between are the items to navigate. Now, when we say a roadmap, we're used to now satellite and road mapping and stuff like that. I grew up in an age of road atlases where you went through and planned stuff ahead of time, which I still use the new tools to do. And things would change based upon traffic conditions and road construction because we didn't know about it then. Thank God for Waze and some of those tools. So we get into those. But even earlier on, you have to think of a map more like an expedition. I think of Lewis and Clark trying to find a way across the continental United States to find a east-west waterway. And so they would have got information for way down for people, and they would have drawn it out the best they can. But as they went through each stage, they got more idea of what the territory looked like. They corrected their maps. They were continuing that kind of things on. Early in your product cycle, you really have an expedition map. And you're filling in the map as you go, and you're revising things as you learn them. And even as it matures, it becomes like a road trip. You may have said, I'm going to go visit, I'm going to write at an amusement park here, but you found something very interesting, like a festival you want to go to. And there's an amusement park 2 stops down. So you basically update your plan because you did something you weren't expecting, because an unexpected opportunity. So roadmaps are flexible like that. But the most important thing is that you're managing risk. So you don't want to assume too much. So you want to be actually getting rid of unknowns and driving out discovery as much as possible. But then also as you get customer feedback and direction, you're able to update and take a chance at those opportunities. And there's a real balance in managing that change. So, but product roadmap is something you're going to maintain all the way through. And any company out there that's building a product has a product roadmap. So it's an early stage thing and a late stage thing as well. So that's pretty much what I have. My experience of 30 years of building products and projects and companies, and working existing business, starting business. This is kind of what I know. Wanted to share with you. If you want to talk with me about a specific situation, we got Q&A now and a chance to the chat and things like that. We'll get to that here real quick. But also, there's some ways to connect with me. My email is john@artisancoding.io. Artisan Coding is the brand I have outside all my startups, so I have a consistent place to be. And then I also included a QR code you can scan with a phone and do an email and connect with you there. I'm John Bentley II on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find. So with that, Omar, let's see if we have any questions.
Yeah, John, first of all, we very much appreciate all this knowledge that you share with us today. It is important to see how much all the different parts of the process of building a product involves, right? So, and someone that already went through all this whole process can share that knowledge, and we really appreciate that. So Thanks. Now we're gonna move on to the Q&A section. We have the chat for the Q&A. John, if you can access to that and read out loud the questions and then provide the answers, that would be awesome.
Yeah, let me get here where I can read it. I'm not. I'm not. I don't know if there's anything queued. I'm not seeing anything in the chat unless I'm missing it.
No, it's right on the bottom part of the screen.
Oh, I got chat up. I'm not saying. I don't see any questions, but I don't know if I have the wrong filter on.
Oh, but right next to the raise your hand button at the middle of the screen, you have the
okay,
Q&A.
I got you. Oh,
yeah.
I got it. Okay, sorry, I haven't used that one before.
Okay.
I'm used to the chat.
Yeah.
All right, there's a good comment here. It's critical to consider intellectual property associated with your product. Partnering with patent attorney is critical. Yeah, so I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with patents. I actually understand the patent process. Everybody understands the value. The idea is that you know, if your company has some information that's inside that's really critical to how you deliver it, how you add value, that's a trade secret. Like Ronaldo didn't show it love, I think it was on the soccer recently, but yeah. I'm a Coke fan. Probably to my detriment sometimes. But anyways, their formula is not patented, it's a trade secret. Now, if someone were to get hold of it, I'm sure they have enough lawyers to try to take care of it, but that's the great fear. If it gets out, it'll become compromised. With a patent, what you're doing is that you have something that basically you believe someone will eventually be able to replicate. So instead of trying to keep it a secret like the formula for Coke or the herbs and spices in our Kentucky Fried Chicken, I live in Kentucky, you actually disclose what it is. And for disclosing it so that people can learn from it and maybe improve upon it and build it in the future, you get a protected area to get the return on that investment. So that's what a patent's for. So a patent can help slow down replication of your idea. Now, I'm not a big fan of software patents. There are work in process patents that if you have something that's, you know, you figured out that has some value, I'm not saying you shouldn't patent it, but when it starts, you can't patent math formulas, you cannot patent algorithms. So there's a lot of trade-offs. So you definitely want to work with somebody that's experienced in patents, a patent attorney, or, you know, maybe before then somebody that's actually gotten patents before in your area, because they'll tell you some stuff for free. It'll be a little bit cheaper. Mm-hmm. But patents are also really good for investment. I get a lot of pressure on patents that I'm not a great guy to talk about it because I do a lot of stuff on open source software. And then, and of course, yeah, this is another good point is multiple sprints based on the platform. So I showed that product build lifecycle, and all I have to admit, anytime you show a snapshot of a process, it looks like this thing called waterfall, which one leads into the other. So two things I want to say about it. First of all, if you're building a product release was a release. So that would align with a, you know, a sprint. It might align with several sprints depending on the product size. You don't want it to be just one. So you'll want to go that over time. The other thing is that whenever you start getting when you start going back when you look at that, even though you may be like in system architecture and the how, you may be going back to the what and why to look at things. When you're looking at where or when the product roadmap, there's times to go back and revisit those things, even the process. So I kind of showed it the order you generally go in. Going back and looking at something, going back and adding to it is going to happen. These are all living documents and things that you want to keep developing as you get insight. And then another thing, you know, we talk about gathering information. Anytime you're dealing with people's information in a product, I've worked a lot in medical care. Primarily United States, though I've looked at some international products, as well as financial and things like that. So anytime you're keeping information, number one, you want to follow just the basic PII standards no matter what, which is you don't keep it on a web server where it talks to the internet. You don't even keep it in the middle where it's like maybe doing some processing. You want to keep it in a third layer, and you want to have encryption in between and things like that. So you're protecting that personal identifying information. And you also, I will tell you, it's good practice to always disclose what and how you're using data. But on top of that, you want to make sure to do it in a way, GDPR really led the way in Europe as a standard. California has a version of that. So making sure you're capturing that. Now, there's a lot of talk about GDPR, the right to forget. When you're providing a product, and someone's paying you to use it, then the right to be forgotten is not as is more malleable. I'm not saying you should store people's data and use it without their permission, but for example, in medical records, if a doctor creates a medical record, you have rights to see how that medical record is used, but you don't have sole ownership of that right because the doctor has professional reasons to hang on to it. Same thing with a financial application. I'm doing some fintech. If you do a financial transaction, you do not have the right to have that forgotten if somebody else has a license or regulatory reason to keep that data. So those are some other things to keep in mind. Is watching out that you don't do one standard over another. You need to weigh those interests out. But most of all, you do need to disclose to customer what's going on. And then if you're working in different countries, you definitely want to know what's going on with that information. And then another one, if your first few people move into leadership positions, how do you choose an outside vendor to fill in some of those gaps they have left behind? That's a great question, because a lot of times, and this is actually one of my philosophies for part of my philosophy team building, is I like to start filling in permanent staff or people that will be on board. We say permanent like they're not going to get another job, but people that are intended to be there for hopefully a couple of years. That's why retention is important as recruiting, and you're guiding them along. And so you try to have them come to leadership positions. Well, sometimes, and I say, first of all, when you're hiring people, don't assume that just everybody you hire wants going to want to manage a vendor or a bunch of people or an outside provider. So you need to find that interaction. Sometimes they'll be required to provide some technical leadership, which means you're going to have to define some of the standards and help define what's being delivered so it can be measured against it, and help out someone that actually is managing that relationship. So you want to develop that, and then make sure I'm hitting this. But then as you are looking for outside vendors to do that, when you talk to an outside vendor, I do differentiate between what I call it project development versus product development, though I don't think I'm giving enough kudos to the project in that. But really, building a project is building a piece of code that's going to be used generally one time by one company for one purpose. And building a product is going to build something that can be delivered multiple times for multiple customers, and maybe in a couple of different ways. So you want people that actually have that product mindset as vendors and have had those type of engagements so they can scale and work with you through those kind of concepts. Yeah, and this is another good point. Biggest challenge to startups is building a front end that engages the customer. Ease of use, investing in UX designers are critical in the planning stages. I agree and both disagree with that statement, but that's because I'm old. I always agree, disagree with everything, including myself. I will say that with consumer and with business, having some engaging UX is important, but I've also seen a lot of UXs that never get a back end. And I've seen some butt ugly systems that have been around for a while. So this is what I call the Craigslist test. Craigslist is by far the ugliest website I have seen that is still making money. I'm not saying you should start at Craigslist, but if you want to have some fun, go to the Internet Archive Project, and it's something like archive.org, I think, and go find a brand that you love and go in the Wayback Machine. It's also called the Wayback Machine from a really old cartoon, and slide that back. I used to do this for students in classes, and they love this because you start to see where things evolve from. So having a good UX is important, but I'd also say don't let that be an excuse not to deliver. Having a usable system that gets them to the functionality they're wanting is really important. I actually did work with a startup that they had spent a fortune in UX designs, but they had no experience in delivering products. And so all the UX designs in the world didn't get implemented because they kept redesigning it. And they never had the back end defined. And simple things like they had an IoT part of the product, and they didn't ever define how it needed to measure accurately or things like that. And so it had some fundamental flaws. So you need to balance that. But I will say that the other thing I'd say is that, a full stack developer, I do not believe in the full stack developer, even though that's what I'm called. And that's because you can't be great at everything. A full stack developer is somebody that understands everything, I think is the best definition. If somebody's really great at UX, Sometimes they're also good at design. Sometimes they're also good at UI. If you're good at UI, you may not be great at UX, but you may be good at it. But you may not know, you may really be bad at back end. You may be good at UI and okay at back end. If you're good at back end, great at back end, you're definitely usually not great at UX. You may be good at databases or UI. I managed to be really good at. I have a lot of experience with data, and I have a lot of experience with back end and API, and that's where I really shine in that integration. I can build a workable UI, but my UI is architecture with HTML plugged in and heavily depending upon a lot of Stack Overflow. So getting stuff to center, they got a lot of great tools now that make it easier, but centering stuff, I'm like 95% there all the time. I can't tell you how many things I know I've had 5 pixels off from being truly centered, but it was good enough and I'll let it go. I mean, that's got us through the Q&A piece.
Yeah, and John, you mentioned something very, very important earlier, that if you're not embarrassed by the product that you're releasing at the beginning, then you're launching something really, really late, right? And that's a quote from an expert of the industry. And I agree with you. You need to start somewhere. I understand the importance of design while building the product, but you need to start and getting feedback as fast as possible, right? I believe that's very important.
And I think that's a principle we can get actually from older retail businesses. When you talk about, so if you've ever driven by a new restaurant, at some point you'll see a lot of cars and people eating there, but you'll look up, you look on Google Maps or something and say, hey, it's not really, why are they eating there? It's not open. Well, the servers and staff, they'll actually do a family night. They'll come in and have a free meal. I've never met Elon Musk, but I met his brother at a restaurant opening in Columbus, Ohio. So, and Billy Ray Cyrus is from Eastern Kentucky, where my family is, but his father was at an opening for a softball field at my uncle's house. So these are my brushes with greatness. But anyway, you get the restaurant. So you have this opening where you're really trying things out, then you have a grand opening. If you think about before an opening, you probably cook something kind of like at a Gordon Ramsay level and cut into it and make sure you're not going to kill anybody and look at the plating and things like that. You'll go through those cycles. So just because you're launching the product also doesn't mean I've launched something that looks like Craigslist and works like a front page website from, which probably nobody knows what that is anymore, from 2002, and you can barely enter the form. And then I'm going to go buy $1 billion in ads and make sure everybody uses it. Yes. So what you're also doing in those early stages is you're working with clients and you're setting client expectations. Because basically, your first 10 customers, and even then you don't get 10 customers, you get 1 customer. Mm-hmm. And then you get 2 customers, then you get 3, and then you get 5. And then you get like 8, and then you get 10, and then you go from 10 to 20, and you have all these different stratifications. But you're bringing them on by hand. You're working with them a lot. And that's where I talked about, MVP, you got to have that core value proposition. Yeah. They got to be bought in heavy on that to put up with what it is. Because that's the 2 things is that, everybody talks about this great experience, and you got to get there. And you can't get there, you can't take forever to get there. But at the same time, people so much need a benefit sometimes, they're going to put up with the things that they don't have. Mm-hmm. And that's true whether you're building software or anything else. I mean, that's just a true thing. And that's why you stage it. You ramp up over time. Mm-hmm. That's also why, customer sign up is a really critical thing. And I never put it on an MVP because I don't want people coming onto it by themselves. I want to put the best thing you actually do. This is my favorite trick is you put it what I call the velvet rope. It's like we can't handle 100 customers. What do? Put up an interest form and tell them we'll invite them. And then after you get like 10 people, give them each 2 invites. Not all of them will bite at it, but if 5 of them invite 2 people, you give them some, and they give like a special price, which is just the price you're charging. Yeah. You give them that experience, then they're like, it's like, hey, I'm inviting something. It's still early. It's not open for prime time, but we got beyond the velvet rope. And that's really that turns an early experience into a premium feel, and that's really important. Yeah, and you get other people to spread the word about your company, to talk about the benefits and the important part, and it's from third person, not from yourselves directly. So that sounds really great. Referrals are gold, but you're creating a way to do it. But you also I heard this thing before when you're, like you got to turn every weakness into your strength. I hear this in movies a lot. But also reading other things. But money's always funny. It's like, if they're big, you got to be small and agile. You're big and slow. And so you got to look at that. So you got to say, okay, we can handle a lot of customers, but we can give the early customers a lot of attention and really let them help shape what it is. And we give the early customers ways to invite people. So we're building so they're getting it back, a payoff by being early in it. And we're creating this community, which is really what you need in early stages.
Great, John. So we very much appreciate your time today. It was such a great presentation. You share all your knowledge about these building these products and launching to the market and getting validation, traction, and learning from real users. So we really recommend to all the attendees to reach out to John. We will share this presentation to you via email, so you can reach out to him. And if you want to learn more, please ask any questions that you have to John. He's super interesting, and he knows a lot about this. And I'm pretty sure that he will be glad to answer all of them. So with this, we will end this presentation. We very much appreciate your time today, and we hope to see you soon, John.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. Like I shared the high level, but I actually know more stuff. So ask me, I'll tell you.
Awesome. That's right. Okay. You have a good one, guys. Take care.